the first thing he remembered was the sound of her voice. Soft, steady, pulling him from the darkness. He didn't know where he was, how he had gotten here, or even who he was. But when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her. And somehow, before he could even form a single thought, he knew, she had been here before. Nurse Emily Sanders had been working the night shift for years, and she had grown accustomed to the quiet, dimly lit hallways of the hospital. Some nights were chaotic, filled with emergencies and the cries of patients in pain, but others were slow, almost eerily peaceful. Room 306 had been part of her routine for the past 2 months. The man inside had been in a coma since the night they brought him in, unconscious, bruised, and barely breathing. No one knew who he was. No ID, no family looking for him, no visitors. The police suspected a mugging gone wrong, but without any leads, his case faded into the background, just another nameless victim left in the hands of doctors and nurses. Emily had seen cases like his before. Some patients woke up, disoriented but relieved to be alive. Others never did. She wasn't sure why she kept spending extra time in his room. Maybe it was the mystery of it all, the idea that somewhere out there, someone might be missing him without even knowing where he was. Or maybe it was something about him, about the way he looked so peaceful despite everything. His dark hair was slightly overgrown, and his strong jawline was marred with healing bruises, but there was something about him that made her want to keep talking to him, even when he couldn't respond. Every evening, before her shift ended, she brought a fresh bouquet of flowers into his room. At first, it had been an impulsive act. The hospital was a cold, sterile place, and she figured if he ever woke up, the least he deserved was to see something beautiful. Over time, it became a habit. She didn't know why it mattered, but it did. Tonight, as she entered his room, the familiar sound of monitors beeping in steady rhythm filled the air. The faint scent of antiseptic mixed with the soft floral fragrance from the bouquet she placed on the small table by his bed. She adjusted his blankets, checked his and sat down for a moment, watching his chest rise and fall. "I don't know if you can hear me," she said softly, more out of habit than expectation. But today was rough. 2 new patients came in from a car accident, and one of the interns nearly passed out from the sight of blood. You'd think they'd prepare them better before throwing them into this world. She chuckled to herself. Then again, I was probably the same way when I started. She sighed, resting her elbows on her knees. It was ridiculous to think he could understand her, but something about talking to him helped ease the long shifts. There was no judgment, no pressure, just the steady silence of a man lost somewhere between life and death. She stood up, ready to leave, when a sound stopped her in her tracks. It was soft at first, a mere whisper, but in the quiet of the room, it was unmistakable. "Where am I?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned sharply, her eyes widening as she saw him. His eyes, deep, dark, and filled with confusion, were open. For a moment, she couldn't move. It had been so long since he arrived, and after weeks of waiting, she had almost convinced herself he never would wake up. Yet here he was, staring at her, blinking against the dim light as if trying to make sense of the world around him. "You," her voice came out as a whisper, almost as if she was afraid to break the fragile moment. "You're awake." His brow furrowed, his gaze flickering around the room before settling back on her. Who are you?" His voice was hoarse, barely more than a rasp, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She took a cautious step closer, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm Emily," she said gently. "I'm your nurse." He seemed to process this for a moment, his breathing uneven as he struggled to make sense of the situation. She could see the panic in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched slightly as if trying to grab onto something real. He took a shaky breath and looked at her again. "Who am I?" Emily felt her heart sink. This was the question she had no answer to. Emily's mind raced as she stood frozen, staring at the man in the hospital bed. He was awake. After weeks of uncertainty, of wondering if he would ever open his eyes, he was finally conscious. But the look on his face wasn't relief or understanding, it was fear, confusion, and something else, something deeper that she couldn't quite place. His question lingered in the air between them. Who am I? The way he said it made her chest tighten. She had expected disorientation. Patients waking from comas often needed time to adjust, but this was different. This wasn't just someone struggling to remember where they were. This was someone who had no idea who he was at all. She forced herself to step closer, her voice soft but steady. You were brought here 2 months ago. You were found unconscious after an attack, and we've been taking care of you since then. She hesitated, watching for any sign of recognition, but his face remained blank. Do you remember anything? Your name? Where you're from? He closed his eyes briefly, his brow creasing as if he were trying to pull something, anything, from the darkness in his mind. Seconds passed, and then he shook his head slightly. Nothing, he said, his voice rough and strained. His fingers clenched around the hospital sheet, frustration evident in the way his jaw tightened. It's just empty. Emily had seen memory loss cases before, but none had ever hit her like this. There was something unsettling about watching a person struggle to grasp their own identity, as if a vital piece of their existence had been stolen from them. She wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make it better, but what comfort could she offer when she had no idea if his memories would ever return? It's okay, she said finally, keeping her voice calm. Sometimes memory loss happens after trauma. It doesn't mean it's permanent. Your mind just needs time to heal. She didn't know if that was true in his case, but it was the best she could give him right now. His gaze met hers, searching for something, answers, maybe, or reassurance that he wasn't completely alone in this. The intensity of his stare made her stomach twist, but she held it, refusing to let him see the uncertainty she felt. And you? He asked, his voice still hoarse. You've been here this whole time? She nodded. Yes. I've been taking care of you. For a moment, he said nothing, just looking at her as if trying to piece something together. Why? He asked finally, and there was no accusation in his tone, only genuine curiosity. Emily hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the chair beside his bed. It was a fair question. She had taken more time with him than she had with most patients. She had sat by his side, talked to him when he couldn't answer, brought him fresh flowers every day even though there was no reason to believe he would ever see them. She could have just said it was her job, that she was simply doing what any nurse would do. But that wasn't entirely true. I don't know, she admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. I guess I just wanted to make sure you weren't alone. His expression softened just slightly, and for the first time, the fear in his eyes seemed to ease, even if just a little. Thank you, he said, the words slow, like they carried more weight than she expected. She offered a small smile, even as something in her chest tightened again. You don't have to thank me. Just focus on getting better. A flicker of something unreadable passed across his face, but before she could try to decipher it, the door to the room opened. Dr. Caldwell stepped inside, his expression shifting from mild surprise to professional composure when he saw that the patient was awake. Well, this is a sight I wasn't sure we'd get to see, he said, glancing at the monitors before looking back at the man in the bed. How are you feeling? The patient hesitated, then said, like I just woke up in someone else's life. Caldwell nodded, clearly not surprised by the response. That's understandable. You've been in a coma for quite some time. Your body has been through a lot, and your mind even more so. He turned to Emily. Has he shown any signs of memory recall? Emily shook her head. Not yet. He doesn't remember anything, not his name, not what happened to him. Caldwell exhaled, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Amnesia following head trauma isn't uncommon. Sometimes memories come back in pieces. Other times, they don't come back at all. He looked at the patient with a carefully measured expression. I know this isn't the answer you want to hear, but for now, we take it one step at a time. The man, Nate, she decided privately, because she couldn't keep calling him the patient in her head, leaned back against the pillow, his exhaustion evident. "So what now?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. "Now, we monitor you. We run some tests. You start physical therapy to regain your strength. And we wait to see if your memories return." Caldwell's voice was calm, practical, but Emily saw the way Nate's fingers tightened around the blanket again, his frustration barely hidden. Waiting. That was the worst part, wasn't it? Not knowing if the answers would ever come. Not knowing if the person he had been before still existed somewhere inside him. "I know this is overwhelming," Emily said gently, "but you're not alone in this." He looked at her again, and this time, there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just fear or confusion anymore, it was trust. Fragile, uncertain, but there. She wasn't sure why that made her chest feel tight again. The next few days passed in a haze of tests, physical therapy, and cautious conversations. Nate, because in her mind, he had become Nate, even if that wasn't his real name, was recovering physically faster than expected. The bruises on his face had faded into faint yellow marks, the swelling in his hands and arms had gone down, and though he was still weak from months of immobility, his body was responding well to treatment. His mind, however, remained a locked door. Emily watched him closely during her shifts, noticing the way he tensed when doctors asked about his memories, the frustration that flickered in his expression when he tried to recall even the simplest details of his past. She had seen patients struggle with amnesia before, but something about Nate's case felt different. He didn't just seem lost, he seemed like a man searching for something that had been violently ripped away from him. One afternoon, she walked into his room to find him staring at the small bouquet of flowers she had left the day before. He wasn't just looking at them, he was frowning, his brows furrowed as if trying to grasp a thought just out of reach. "Something wrong?" she asked gently, stepping closer. He didn't answer right away. His fingers twitched slightly, as if he wanted to reach out and touch the petals but wasn't sure why. Finally, he exhaled and turned to look at her. "I think I remember something," he said, and just those few words sent a jolt through her. She moved closer without thinking, her heart pounding a little harder than it should have. "What is it?" Nate's eyes remained fixed on the flowers, his jaw tight. "It's not much," he admitted. "Just a feeling. Like flowers meant something to me before. I don't know why." He hesitated, then shook his head. "It's stupid. Probably just my brain playing tricks on me." Emily sat down in the chair beside his bed, folding her hands in her lap. "It's not stupid. Any memory, no matter how small, is a step forward." He let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah? Then why does it feel like I'm standing still?" She understood his frustration. To wake up one day and realize that your entire identity had been erased was a terrifying thought. No past, no sense of self, just a void where your life used to be. But she also knew that pushing too hard wouldn't help him. "You're not standing still," she said firmly. "Your body is healing, your mind is healing. These things take time." His gaze met hers, something unreadable in his dark eyes. "You keep saying that," he murmured. "Like you actually believe it." "I do," she said without hesitation. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Emily had the strangest feeling that he was trying to figure her out as much as he was trying to figure out himself. Then he shifted, wincing slightly as he adjusted his position. "Tell me something," he said, his tone quieter now. "You've been here since I woke up. Before that too, I guess. Why do you care so much?" The question shouldn't have caught her off guard, but it did. She had asked herself the same thing late at night, wondering why she felt this strange, unexplainable pull toward him. She could have easily done her job, checked in on him, made sure he was stable, and moved on. But she hadn't. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Maybe because I've seen too many people in this hospital who didn't have anyone waiting for them. You were alone when they brought you in. No one came looking for you, no family, no friends. I guess I just didn't want you to feel like you didn't matter." Something in his expression changed. It wasn't a smile, not exactly, but some of the tension in his face eased. He looked away, exhaling slowly, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something close to acceptance. "You're wrong," he said after a pause, his voice quieter than before. She frowned. "About what?" He turned back to her, and there was something almost vulnerable in his gaze. "That no one came looking for me. Maybe they did. Maybe I just don't remember." Emily considered that. It was entirely possible. If he had people out there searching for him, if someone was waiting for him to come home, he had no way of knowing it. She wanted to believe that was true. That somewhere out there, someone missed him, loved him, wanted him back. But a small, selfish part of her didn't want to think about that yet. Because if someone was waiting for him, it meant one day he might leave. And she wasn't sure why that thought made her feel so hollow. "We'll find out," she said finally. "One way or another, we'll figure out who you are." Nate studied her for a long moment before nodding. "Okay," he said softly. And for the first time since waking up, he sounded like he actually believed it too. Days turned into weeks, and though Nate's body continued to recover, his mind remained an empty slate. The doctors ran tests, trying to determine if his amnesia was psychological or the result of physical trauma, but there were no clear answers. His brain scans showed no permanent damage, no indication of why his memories refused to surface. Some of the specialists believed they might return with time, while others warned that they might never come back at all. It was an infuriating limbo, one that Nate struggled with more and more each day. Emily could see it in the way his jaw clenched and the doctors spoke to him, in the way his hands curled into fists when they asked if he remembered anything new. The frustration was eating at him, making him restless, making him angry at a situation he couldn't control. And she understood. How could she not? To wake up in a body that felt like yours but held no history, no proof of who you used to be, was a kind of torture she couldn't even begin to imagine. One evening, near the end of her shift, she walked into his room to find him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his reflection in the small mirror mounted on the opposite wall. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense, like he was bracing himself against some invisible weight. He didn't turn to acknowledge her when she stepped inside. "I don't recognize my own face," he said after a long silence. His voice was quiet, but there was something raw in it, something that made her heart ache. "I keep thinking maybe if I just look long enough, something will click. But it never does." Emily hesitated near the door, unsure if he wanted to be alone. She didn't want to push him, but she also didn't want him to sit here drowning in frustration. Slowly, she stepped closer, stopping a few feet away. "It's not your fault," she said gently. "Your brain is trying to protect you. Sometimes it shuts things out until it's ready to let them back in." He let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "Yeah? Then what the hell am I supposed to do in the meantime? Just sit here and wait? Hope one day I wake up and suddenly remember who I am?" She exhaled, understanding his anger but knowing there were no easy answers. "You do what you can with what you have," she said, keeping her voice even. "You move forward, even if you don't know where the road leads yet." He finally turned his gaze to her, his dark eyes searching hers for something, though she wasn't sure what. "And if the memories never come back?" The question lingered in the air between them. She had thought about that too, about what would happen if this was his new reality, if the past was forever out of reach. "Then you decide who you want to be now," she said simply. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he looked back at the mirror, running a hand through his slightly overgrown hair. "It's weird," he murmured. "Looking at myself and feeling like I'm seeing a stranger." Emily stepped closer, this time standing beside him, her gaze meeting his in the reflection. "Maybe that's because you're still becoming whoever you're meant to be," she said softly. "Your past is part of you, but it doesn't have to define you." For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he nodded, as if trying to let her words sink in. "You always know what to say," he muttered, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, though there was still exhaustion in his eyes. She huffed a quiet laugh. I don't, actually. I just say what I hope would help if I were in your place. He turned his head slightly, looking at her, really looking at her, and for the first time since he had woken up, there was something lighter in his expression. Well, it helps, he admitted. She smiled, and for a brief second, it felt like the weight in the room lifted just a little. But then, as if the moment was too fragile to last, Nate's hand moved absent-mindedly to the chain of his hospital bracelet, his fingers tracing the smooth plastic. He froze suddenly, his entire body going rigid. Emily immediately noticed the shift, the way his breathing grew slightly uneven, the tension tightening his shoulders. Nate, she asked cautiously, her voice barely above a whisper. His fingers clenched around the bracelet, his jaw tightening. A ring, he said, the words barely more than a breath. His eyes flicked to hers, and this time, there was something behind them, something desperate, something sharp. I remember, a ring. Emily felt her pulse quicken. It wasn't much, but it was something. What kind of ring? She asked carefully, not wanting to break whatever fragile thread his mind had grabbed onto. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, trying to pull the image from the depths of his mind. Silver, he murmured. A silver ring. It was important. I don't know why, but I know it mattered. Her breath caught. She remembered the ring. When they had brought him in, the only possession he had on him was a silver band with an engraving inside. It had been removed during the initial examination and placed with his personal effects, sealed away in storage in case anyone ever came to claim him. She took a cautious step forward. We found a ring when you were brought in, she said gently. It's still here, in the hospital's storage. Nate's eyes snapped open, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Can I see it? Emily hesitated for only a second before nodding. I'll go get it. As she turned to leave the room, she felt something shift in the air. It was the first piece of the puzzle, the first crack in the wall that separated him from his past. She didn't know what the ring meant, what memories it might bring back, or if they were memories he would even want to face. But whatever came next, she knew that everything was about to change. Emily moved quickly through the hospital's back corridors, her mind racing with possibilities. The ring had been the only thing found on Nate the night he was brought in. She remembered seeing it in the small evidence bag when the doctors had logged his personal items. At the time, it had seemed insignificant, just a simple silver band with an engraving inside. Now it felt like the key to everything. If Nate remembered the ring, maybe it would trigger something else. Maybe this was the breakthrough he had been waiting for. She reached the storage room, where the hospital kept patients' belongings that hadn't been claimed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. Shelves lined the walls, filled with labeled bins containing forgotten wallets, cell phones, and clothing from people who had been admitted unconscious, just like Nate. Emily scanned the labels, searching for the right one. When she finally found it, she carefully pulled out the small plastic bag, her fingers tightening around it as she saw the ring inside. It was simple, unpolished silver, slightly worn at the edges. When she turned it over, she could still make out the engraving along the inside of the band, small but precise lettering that read, "Until the end of time." The words sent a shiver through her. It wasn't just a generic inscription. It was personal. It meant something to whoever had worn it. And it clearly meant something to Nate. She made her way back to his room, gripping the bag a little tighter than necessary. When she stepped inside, he was sitting up straighter than before, his entire body tense, his eyes locked onto her the moment she entered. There was an urgency in his expression, a barely restrained anticipation, like he was bracing himself for something life-changing. Without a word, she crossed the room and handed him the bag. Nate stared at it for a second before taking it from her, his fingers visibly trembling as he unsealed the plastic and pulled out the ring. He held it between his fingers, turning it slowly, studying every inch of it. His thumb traced the engraving, and suddenly, his entire body stiffened. Emily saw the moment something clicked in his mind. His breathing became shallow, his eyes darkened with something unreadable, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Eliza. The name sent a jolt through Emily, and she wasn't sure why. It wasn't her name, wasn't connected to her in any way, but the way Nate said it, like it was both a revelation and a curse, made something twist in her stomach. She swallowed, keeping her voice steady. Who is Eliza? Nate didn't answer right away. His fingers curled around the ring, his knuckles white, his entire body locked in place. His gaze was distant, unfocused, as if he were seeing something she couldn't. Finally, he exhaled shakily and shook his head. I don't know, he admitted, frustration creeping into his tone. I know the name. I know it's important. But everything else is still, he trailed off, closing his eyes as though trying to force the memories to the surface. Emily hesitated, unsure if pushing him further would help or hurt. But then he opened his eyes again, and the intensity in them sent a shiver down her spine. I need to find out who she is, he said. She's connected to me. To this. He lifted the ring slightly, as if it held the answers he was searching for. She might know who I am. The idea made sense. If Eliza was important enough for him to remember even when everything else was gone, then she had to be a key part of his past. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something about this was off. She sat down beside him, keeping her voice gentle but firm. I understand, but we need to be careful. You don't know what happened to you, Nate. You were attacked. Someone wanted to hurt you. What if finding Eliza puts you in danger? Nate's jaw tightened, his grip on the ring unyielding. I can't just do nothing, he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. I can't keep sitting in this room, waiting for memories that might never come back. This is something real. It's the only thing I have to hold on to. Emily bit the inside of her cheek, torn between reason and the undeniable truth that he needed answers. She understood why he felt this urgency, why he couldn't just let it go. If she were in his position, she wasn't sure she'd be able to let it go either. She sighed, nodding slowly. Okay, she said finally. I'll help you. Nate looked at her, a flicker of relief crossing his face. You will? Yes, she said firmly. But we do this the right way. No rushing into things, no making assumptions. We talk to the hospital, see if the police ever looked into your case properly. If they didn't, we make sure they do now. If Eliza is out there, we'll find her. But we do it carefully. For a moment, he just stared at her, and then, slowly, he nodded. Okay. His voice was quieter this time, but there was something steadier about it too, as if just knowing he wasn't in this alone made all the difference. Emily exhaled, feeling the weight of what they were about to do settle in. She had no idea what they would find. She had no idea if Eliza was waiting for Nate, if she had spent the last 2 months searching for him, or if she was the reason he had ended up here in the first place. But as she looked at him, at the way he held that ring like it was the only real thing in a world of uncertainty, she knew they had just crossed a line. This wasn't just about recovery anymore. It was about finding the truth, no matter what it turned out to be. Emily spent the next morning making calls, speaking with hospital administrators, and tracking down the officer who had originally been assigned to Nate's case. It turned out there hadn't been much of an investigation. With no ID, no leads, and no one coming forward to report a missing person, the police had shelved the case, treating it as just another unsolved assault in the city. The officer she spoke with agreed to take another look now that Nate was awake and remembered a name, but his tone had been doubtful. Cases like these didn't always get the attention they deserved, not unless there was something bigger pushing them forward. When she returned to Nate's room, she found him sitting up, flipping the silver ring between his fingers, lost in thought. He looked up as soon as she stepped inside, his eyes scanning her face for answers before she even had the chance to speak. They didn't do much with your case, she admitted, setting her clipboard down. No missing person reports that matched your description. No real leads. The police said they'll take another look now that we have a name, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Nate exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around the ring. So what does that mean? That I'm just supposed to sit here and hope for the best? Emily could hear the frustration in his voice, and she didn't blame him. He had been stuck in this hospital for weeks, his mind empty, his past a mystery, and now the one solid clue he had, Eliza, was just another dead end. She didn't want him to feel hopeless, but she also didn't want him to take reckless risks just to chase something he wasn't ready to face. "We're not just waiting," she said, taking a step closer. "I've been thinking. If Eliza was important to you, there's a good chance she reported you missing somewhere. Even if she didn't go to the police, there could be something online. Social media, missing persons databases, anything. We can start looking there." He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing whether or not he should trust her plan. Then he nodded. "Okay. Let's do it." Emily sat down beside him, pulling her phone from her pocket. She opened a search engine and typed in the name Eliza along with a few keywords: missing person, engaged, searching, last seen. At first, nothing useful came up, just random articles and social media profiles that didn't seem to match. She tried again, narrowing the search, adding terms like disappearance and news. And then, after a few minutes of scrolling, she saw it. Her breath caught as she clicked on the link. The page loaded slowly, and then, in bold black letters at the top of the screen, she saw the headline: Billionaire Tech CEO Nathan Hale missing after alleged corporate scandal. Her hands went numb. She barely registered Nate's voice as he leaned closer. "What?" he asked. "What is it?" She forced herself to read, her heart pounding. Nathan Hale, 34, CEO of Hale Tech, was reported missing nearly 2 months ago after a publicized dispute with his fiancée, Eliza Montgomery. Sources claim the couple was involved in a legal battle over control of the company following allegations of financial misconduct. Montgomery has publicly denied any involvement in Hale's disappearance, stating that she believes he may have left on his own. However, speculation continues as police have yet to find any leads. Emily slowly turned the phone so Nate could see the screen. His eyes locked onto the name at the top, his name. He stared at the picture below it, a professional headshot of a man in a suit, polished and composed, staring straight at the camera with a confidence that felt completely different from the Nate she knew. His fingers clenched against the bed as he took it in. "That's me," he said, his voice barely more than a breath. "Nathan Hale." Emily watched as a million emotions flickered across his face: shock, confusion, disbelief. Then something darker. His gaze dropped to the paragraph about the scandal, and his hands clenched even tighter. "They think I ran?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharper. "They think I just left?" She wasn't sure what to say. The article was vague, full of speculation and unanswered questions. There were no details about what had actually happened between him and Eliza, just whispers of legal disputes and financial problems. She could feel the tension radiating off of him as he read every word, as if trying to force the pieces to fit together. "I don't remember any of this," he said after a long silence. "I don't remember this company, this life, or her." He hesitated, gripping the ring in his palm. "But I know she mattered to me." Emily hesitated. "Do you think she knows what happened to you?" His jaw tensed. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I need to find out." The determination in his voice made something uneasy settle in Emily's chest. She had wanted him to find answers, had wanted him to regain the pieces of himself that had been lost, but now that it was happening, now that his past was no longer just a mystery but something real and tangible, she felt something she hadn't expected: fear. Fear of what he would find. Fear of who he might become once he remembered everything. Fear that the man sitting beside her, the man she had come to know, would be nothing like Nathan Hale. She swallowed hard and met his gaze. "Then we find her." He nodded, but there was something distant in his expression now, something unreadable. Emily forced herself to smile, but deep down, she had the sinking feeling that nothing about this search was going to be easy. The moment they found the article, everything changed. Nate wasn't just a man without a past anymore, he was Nathan Hale, a billionaire CEO who had vanished under suspicious circumstances. The weight of that realization sat heavy between them as they read through every article, every theory, every whispered accusation about his disappearance. Some sources claimed he had run to escape the fallout of a corporate scandal. Others suggested something more sinister, that he had been forced out, silenced, or worse. The only consistent fact was that no one had seen or heard from him in nearly 2 months. Emily watched Nate as he absorbed all of it. He was gripping the phone so tightly that his knuckles had turned white, his jaw locked as he stared at the screen. She wanted to say something, to tell him that none of this defined him, that he was still the man sitting here now, not just the sum of the accusations in the headlines. But she also knew he needed time to process it. After a long silence, he exhaled sharply and set the phone down on the hospital bed beside him. "I need to talk to her," he said finally, his voice steady but edged with something unreadable. "I need to talk to Eliza." Emily had expected that. She had known from the moment he first spoke her name that this was where they were headed. But that didn't make it any easier to hear. Every instinct in her told her to be cautious. She had no idea what kind of person Eliza was, whether she had been searching for him or whether she had something to do with his disappearance. But Nate needed this, and she wasn't going to stand in his way. "I'll help you find her," she said, keeping her voice firm. "But we do this the right way. No rushing into anything until we know what we're walking into." Nate gave her a small nod, but she could tell he wasn't going to wait long. It took 2 days to track down an address for Eliza Montgomery. Her name was everywhere in connection to the scandal, but she had kept a low profile since Nate's disappearance, avoiding interviews and issuing only carefully worded statements denying any wrongdoing. According to a Business Journal article, she had taken temporary control of Hale Tech in Nate's absence, citing the need for stability within the company. The article made it sound like she had simply stepped up to handle the crisis, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than that. When they finally arrived outside the townhouse listed under Eliza's name, Nate hesitated for the first time. He had been so sure, so determined to get here, but now that he was standing on the doorstep, staring at the door like it held all the answers he had been searching for, something in him faltered. Emily saw it in the way his hand hovered over the doorbell, the way his breathing became uneven. "You don't have to do this alone," she said softly. He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze. "I know," he said, but there was something distant in his expression. "I have to do it anyway." Before she could say anything else, he pressed the doorbell. The wait felt endless. Emily could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then the door opened, and a woman stood there, staring at them with wide, startled eyes. Eliza Montgomery was striking, with high cheekbones, deep green eyes, and perfectly styled dark hair that looked effortless but probably took hours to achieve. She was dressed in elegant but understated clothes, like someone who had carefully crafted an image of control. For a long moment, she just stared at Nate, her face a mixture of shock and something else, something unreadable. "Nathan," she breathed, barely more than a whisper. Nate's jaw tightened. "Eliza." Emily felt like an outsider watching something unfold that had been years in the making. She didn't belong here in this moment, but at the same time, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Eliza blinked rapidly, as if trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Then, suddenly, she reached for him, her fingers grazing his arm as if making sure he was real. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You're alive." Nate didn't move. He didn't lean into her touch, but he didn't pull away either. "Yeah," he said, his voice unreadable. "I guess I am." Eliza's gaze flickered to Emily, and something shifted in her expression, like she had just realized they weren't alone. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Emily opened her mouth to answer, but Nate beat her to it. "She's the reason I made it out alive," he said simply. Eliza's lips parted slightly, like the answer had caught her off guard. But then she nodded, stepping back and gesturing for them to come inside. The townhouse was immaculate, the kind of place that felt like it belonged in a magazine. Everything was in its place, perfectly curated, perfectly controlled. Emily wondered if Eliza had always been this way or if it was something she had learned over time. Eliza led them into a spacious sitting area, where she perched on the edge of a pristine white couch. Nate remained standing, arms crossed, his body language tense. Emily stayed near the doorway, giving them space but refusing to leave entirely. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Eliza let out a breath. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. "How about telling me what happened?" Nate's voice was low, controlled, but Emily could hear the edge beneath it. "Why I was left to die in an alley while the world thought I just disappeared." Eliza flinched slightly, but she didn't look away. "I didn't know," she said. "Nathan, I swear, I didn't know. When you disappeared, I thought," she hesitated, exhaling. "I thought you ran. After everything that happened with the company, after what they were saying about you. I didn't know what else to believe." Nate's expression didn't change. "And you just took my place?" Her jaw tightened. "Someone had to," she said. "The board was panicking. The investors wanted stability. I was trying to protect what you built." Nate shook his head. "And you never thought to ask if maybe I didn't run? That maybe something happened to me?" Eliza hesitated, but Emily could see the truth written all over her face. Maybe she had wondered. Maybe she had even suspected. But she had been too focused on holding everything together to look too closely at the cracks. "I'm sorry," she said finally, and for the first time, it sounded genuine. "I should have looked for you. I should have done more." Nate exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know what happened to me," he admitted. "I don't remember. But I know I didn't run." Eliza nodded, her expression unreadable. "Then we find out the truth," she said. Emily wasn't sure if she believed her, but as she looked at Nate, she knew one thing for certain: this wasn't the end of his search. It was just the beginning. This story isn't just about memory loss or uncovering a hidden past, it's about identity, trust, and the fear of the unknown. At its core, it's a story of transformation. Nate begins as a man without a name, a blank slate searching for meaning, and along the way, he discovers that the truth isn't always the most important thing. What matters more is the person he chooses to become. Eliza represents the life he left behind, the world of power, business, and betrayal. Whether she's telling the truth or hiding something darker is up for debate, but one thing is certain: she is part of who he was. Emily, on the other hand, symbolizes the new path in front of him. She isn't tied to his past, doesn't expect anything from him except honesty, and in many ways, she becomes his anchor when everything else feels uncertain. The ending leaves the door open. There's no easy resolution because life isn't that simple. Nate has found his past, but does he truly want it back? And if he does, will it cost him the version of himself he became with Emily? The tension between knowing and not knowing, between who we were and who we choose to be, is what makes this story compelling. At the heart of it all is one question: is Nate's future written by the past he's rediscovering, or by the life he has yet to create? The answer, perhaps, is something only he can decide.